The morning air in Atlanta was crisp, with planes roaring overhead as Jordan Carter pulled into the parking lot of AeroLink Airlines headquarters. His black SUV gleamed under the sunlight as he stepped out, a man of commanding presence dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. At 43, Jordan was everything a pilot aspired to be: calm under pressure, meticulous, and a pioneer in the skies. But today, he wasn't here to fly. Today, he was here to change the course of his life, and maybe the airline industry itself. Jordan had started his career over 2 decades ago, working his way up from regional routes to international flights. His reputation was impeccable and his record spotless. Few people knew, however, that Jordan was also a significant shareholder in AeroLink Airlines, holding a 12% stake in the company, a legacy from his late father, who had been an early investor. Despite his accomplishments, Jordan knew that being a black man in the aviation industry was like flying through turbulence every day. Still, he believed in the power of persistence and professionalism. As he approached the towering glass building of AeroLink, Jordan adjusted his tie and carried himself with quiet confidence. But the moment he stepped into the lobby, he felt the familiar sting of judgment. The receptionist, a young white woman with a forced smile, barely glanced at him before speaking. "Maintenance staff entrance is around the back," she said curtly, her eyes scanning him up and down. Jordan stopped in his tracks, his eyebrows arching. "Excuse me?" he said, his deep voice calm but firm. She blinked, surprised by his tone. The meeting rooms are for executives and board members only. You'll need to wait outside if you're here for other work." For a moment, Jordan considered correcting her, but he decided against it. It wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. Instead, he gave her a measured look and walked past her desk, heading straight for the elevators. Behind him, he heard her protesting, "Sir, you can't—" But the doors closed before she could finish her sentence. As the elevator ascended, Jordan's mind raced. He had anticipated resistance today, but not this blatant. The airline's systemic racial bias wasn't new to him. He had experienced it firsthand throughout his career. But what he had uncovered in the last year went far beyond personal slights. Today he was armed with undeniable proof, a report that would shake AeroLink to its core. The elevator chimed as it reached the 12th floor, where the shareholder meeting was being held. Jordan stepped out into a sleek conference room filled with AeroLink's top executives, board members, and other shareholders. Conversations hushed as heads turned toward him. Some recognized him as the airline's distinguished pilot. Others, like COO Richard Fairchild, barely concealed their disdain. Well, Fairchild said with a smirk, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't expect to see you here, Carter. Thought you'd be out there flying planes, not sitting in boardrooms." Jordan met his gaze without flinching. "I go where I'm needed," he replied smoothly, taking a seat at the large oval table. His presence, though quiet, commanded attention. He wasn't here to play games, he was here to make a statement. The tension in the room was palpable as Jordan Carter settled into his seat at the large conference table. Around him sat AeroLink's most powerful figures: the CEO, the COO Richard Fairchild, and a handful of other executives who seemed to view the airline as their personal kingdom. Most of them were white men, save for a token woman and one younger Asian executive who avoided eye contact with everyone else. Jordan scanned their faces, noting the thinly veiled skepticism in their expressions. "Nice of you to join us, Carter," Fairchild said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But don't you think you're a little out of your depth here? After all, this is a shareholder meeting, not pilot training." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but Jordan didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor unshaken. He was used to this, used to being underestimated, used to the quiet and not-so-quiet jabs. But what they didn't know was that he had come prepared to expose every crack in their carefully polished facade. "I think you'll find," Jordan began, his voice steady and unwavering, "that I'm exactly where I need to be." The room fell silent. Fairchild's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, waving a dismissive hand. Fine. Let's move on. We've got a lot to discuss today." But before the meeting could proceed, an incident occurred that perfectly encapsulated the problem Jordan was there to address. A catering staff member entered the room, wheeling in a tray of coffee and pastries. Without missing a beat, one of the older executives turned to Jordan and said, "Can you help her out with that? She looks like she could use a hand." Jordan froze, his eyes narrowing. He could feel the heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to remain composed. "I'm not here to serve coffee," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the awkward silence like a knife. The executive's face turned red, and he stammered, Oh, of course, my mistake." Fairchild let out a dry laugh. "Let's not get too sensitive, Carter. It was just a misunderstanding." Jordan didn't respond. Instead, he opened the sleek black folder he had brought with him and placed it on the table. "Since we're all here to discuss AeroLink's future," he said, his tone measured but sharp, "I think it's time we take a hard look at the company's present." The executives exchanged puzzled glances. Fairchild raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Jordan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Fairchild's. "I mean the systemic discrimination that's been allowed to fester in this company for years." A murmur swept through the room, but Jordan pressed on. He flipped open the folder, revealing a detailed report filled with charts, graphs, and testimonies. "This," he said, "is a comprehensive analysis of AeroLink's hiring, promotion, and workplace practices over the last decade, and what it reveals is nothing short of damning." For the next several minutes, Jordan walked them through the report. He highlighted the stark disparities in hiring practices, showing how black pilots were routinely overlooked for promotions, despite having more experience and better performance records than their white counterparts. He presented evidence of hiring favoritism, where less qualified white candidates were given priority over more capable black applicants. And he shared anonymous testimonies from employees who had endured years of discrimination and harassment without any recourse. The room grew increasingly tense as Jordan spoke. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided looking at him altogether. Fairchild, however, remained defiant. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "This is quite the performance, Carter," Fairchild said when Jordan finished. "But let's not get carried away. Every company has its challenges, and frankly, I think you're blowing things out of proportion." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he refused to be baited. "The numbers don't lie, Richard, and neither do the testimonies of your employees." Fairchild waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. Anonymous testimonies? Anyone can make up a sob story. This is nothing but a smear campaign." Jordan's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his composure. He closed the folder and looked around the table, meeting each executive's gaze. "This isn't just about me," he said. "This is about the culture of this company and the message it sends to the world. AeroLink prides itself on being a leader in the aviation industry, but how can we lead when we're still stuck in the past?" For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Jordan's words hung heavy in the air. But then Fairchild broke the silence with a derisive laugh. "Well, I hope you enjoyed your little speech, Carter. But I think I speak for everyone here when I say that this meeting is about business, not personal grievances. So if you don't mind, let's get back to the agenda." Jordan regarded him coolly. "You're right," he said. "This is about business, and that's why I've decided to sell my shares in AeroLink and make this report public." The room erupted into chaos. Executives shouted over each other, their voices a mix of panic and outrage. Fairchild's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what kind of damage that would do?" Jordan stood, gathering his folder and briefcase. "I know exactly what kind of damage it will do. And maybe that's what this company needs, a wake-up call." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving the executives to grapple with the fallout of his decision. Jordan Carter stepped out of the conference room and into the corridor, his heart pounding but his expression calm. He had done it. He had made the decision that many would have been too afraid, or too complacent, to make. The weight of years of silent frustration had been lifted from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose. But he knew that the storm was just beginning. By the time Jordan reached the lobby, news of the meeting had already begun to spread. A few employees whispered and exchanged glances as he passed, their curiosity piqued by the unusual tension in the air. Jordan ignored them, his focus fixed on the task ahead. He had an appointment with the truth, and the world was about to hear what he had to say. He exited the building and walked to his car where his assistant, Malik, was waiting. Malik, a young man in his late 20s, had been helping Jordan compile the report for months. He was as passionate about exposing AeroLink's discriminatory practices as Jordan was. "Well?" Malik asked, his voice laced with anticipation as Jordan slid into the passenger seat. Jordan exhaled deeply. "It's done. They know what's coming." A slow smile spread across Malik's face. Good. The press releases are ready, and the report's already been sent to every major news outlet in the country. By the time they finish their lunch breaks, this is going to be the headline everywhere. Jordan nodded, his gaze distant. Good. Let's make sure they can't sweep this under the rug. The media frenzy. The first headline broke less than 2 hours later. AeroLink Airlines accused of systemic racism. Whistleblower shares explosive report. Within minutes, the news spread like wildfire. National and local media outlets picked up the story, amplifying the scandal. Social media erupted with hashtags like NAR AeroLink Exposed and NAR Equality in Aviation, as people shared snippets of the report and voiced their outrage. The evidence Jordan had compiled was undeniable. Charts showing the glaring racial disparities in AeroLink's hiring and promotion practices circulated widely. The testimonies of employees, raw and heartbreaking, sparked a wave of empathy and anger. One particularly damning excerpt read, "I've been with AeroLink for 15 years, and I've watched less experienced white pilots climb the ranks while I've been stuck in the same position. No matter how hard I work, it's never enough. I've stopped believing that things will ever change here." The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning AeroLink and calling for accountability. Aviation unions began organizing protests, demanding safer and more equitable workplaces. Even politicians weighed in, with several high-profile figures urging federal investigations into the airline's practices. Inside AeroLink's headquarters, chaos reigned. Executives rushed to contain the fallout, but the damage was already done. Investors began pulling out, sending the company's stock value into a nosedive. Lawyers flooded the boardroom, warning of the lawsuits that were sure to follow. Employees, emboldened by Jordan's bravery, began to come forward with their own stories of discrimination, adding fuel to the fire. Richard Fairchild, the COO, was at the center of the storm. For years he had ruled AeroLink with an iron fist, dismissing complaints and brushing off allegations of bias. But now his arrogance had caught up with him. The board of directors, desperate to salvage the company's reputation, convened an emergency meeting to address the crisis. "You've become a liability," one board member said bluntly, glaring at Fairchild across the table. "The media is calling for your resignation, and we can't afford to keep you here." Fairchild's face turned red. "You're throwing me under the bus?" he spat. "This is Carter's doing. He's the one who—" "This isn't about Carter," another board member interrupted. "This is about the toxic culture you've allowed to thrive under your leadership. You failed to address these issues when you had the chance, and now we're paying the price." Fairchild opened his mouth to argue, but the decision had already been made. Within hours, a press release was issued announcing his resignation. It was too little, too late. Meanwhile, Jordan watched the fallout from a distance. He had no interest in gloating or celebrating AeroLink's collapse. For him, this was never about revenge. It was about justice. He knew that the fight for equity in aviation was far from over, but this was an important first step. As the days went on, Jordan found himself inundated with messages of support. Black pilots from across the country reached out to thank him for his courage. Civil rights leaders praised him for shining a light on an issue that had been ignored for too long. And young aspiring pilots wrote to him, inspired by his actions to pursue their dreams, despite the obstacles. But not all the responses were positive. Jordan received his fair share of hate mail and threats from anonymous individuals who accused him of ruining a company and playing the race card. He ignored them. The truth was on his side, and he refused to let fear or hatred deter him. Malik, ever the optimist, tried to keep Jordan focused on the bigger picture. "You've done something incredible," he said one evening as they reviewed the latest news coverage. "This isn't just about AeroLink. This is about changing an entire industry." Jordan nodded, his resolve firm. "We've started a conversation," he said, "but now we need to turn that conversation into action." The collapse of AeroLink Airlines was slow but inevitable. The company's reputation, once a symbol of prestige, had been irreparably tarnished. Lawsuits from current and former employees piled up, each one revealing more stories of neglect, bias, and outright discrimination. The public boycotts intensified as more damning evidence came to light, and AeroLink's attempts at damage control only highlighted how deeply entrenched the problems were. Within a year of Jordan Carter's explosive revelations, AeroLink declared bankruptcy. The company that had once dominated the skies was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when systemic injustice goes unchecked. For many, the downfall of AeroLink was a moment of vindication. But for Jordan, it was only the beginning. Jordan Carter could have walked away after AeroLink's collapse. He could have returned to his life as a pilot, quietly enjoying the satisfaction of having exposed the truth. But that wasn't who he was. Jordan had always believed in using his position to uplift others, and now he had an even bigger platform to do so. Instead of returning to the cockpit, Jordan shifted his focus to advocacy. He founded an organization called Lift Up the Skies, dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the aviation industry. The organization provided scholarships and mentorship programs for underrepresented groups, helping aspiring pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals overcome the barriers that had held so many back. Jordan also partnered with unions, civil rights groups, and industry leaders to push for systemic reforms. He worked tirelessly to advocate for new policies that would ensure accountability and fairness in hiring, promotions, and workplace culture. His efforts led to the creation of the Aviation Equity Act, a groundbreaking piece of legislation that mandated diversity audits and anti-discrimination training across the industry. Through it all, Jordan remained humble. He often said that his fight wasn't about bringing down AeroLink. It was about building a better future for everyone in aviation. His story became a rallying cry for change, inspiring countless others to speak out against injustice in their own industries. The impact of Jordan's actions rippled far beyond the aviation industry. Young black pilots, who had once doubted their chances of breaking into the field, now saw in him a role model, a living testament to the power of resilience and courage. Schools and flight academies began inviting Jordan to speak, and he never turned down an opportunity to inspire the next generation. One of those aspiring pilots was a teenager named Marcus Johnson. Marcus, a high school senior from Chicago, had always dreamed of flying planes but had been discouraged by the lack of representation in the field. When he saw Jordan Carter on the news, everything changed. "He looks like me," Marcus had told his mother, his voice filled with awe. "If he can do it, so can I." A few years later, Marcus became one of the first recipients of a Lift Up the Skies scholarship. Jordan personally mentored him, and when Marcus earned his pilot's license, Jordan was there to celebrate with him. Moments like these reminded Jordan why he had fought so hard in the first place. Even as Jordan moved forward, AeroLink's demise remained a stark reminder of how deeply systemic problems could run. Former employees of the airline struggled to rebuild their careers, while other companies in the industry scrambled to avoid becoming the next AeroLink. The scandal forced a reckoning, prompting airlines across the country to reevaluate their policies and practices. Richard Fairchild, the disgraced former COO, largely disappeared from the public eye. He attempted to shift blame for the company's collapse, but his reputation was beyond repair. Meanwhile, AeroLink's board of directors faced scrutiny for their complicity, with several members resigning in disgrace. But for all the damage AeroLink had caused, its downfall also opened the door for progress. New companies emerged with a commitment to equity and inclusion, eager to prove that the aviation industry could soar to greater heights when everyone had a chance to succeed. Years later, Jordan Carter stood at the edge of a tarmac, watching as a group of young pilots prepared for their first solo flights. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the plains. It was a scene that always filled him with hope. One of the students, a young black woman named Tasha, approached him nervously. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd ever have believed I could do this." Jordan smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me, Tasha. This is your journey. You earned this. But you showed us the way," she insisted. "You made us believe it was possible." Jordan nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Then promise me this," he said. "When the time comes, you'll do the same for someone else." She smiled, her determination shining through. "I will." As Jordan watched her walk away, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent his life navigating turbulent skies, both literal and figurative, and while the journey had been far from easy, it had been worth every challenge. Looking up at the sky, Jordan thought about the battles he had fought and the lives he had touched. AeroLink was gone, but its collapse had paved the way for something better. The industry was changing, slowly but surely, and he knew that the fight for justice and equity would continue long after he was gone. But for now, he was content to stand on that tarmac, watching the next generation take flight. The story of Jordan Carter is not just a tale of one man's fight against injustice. It's a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Through courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to equity, Jordan proved that change is possible, even in the face of systemic oppression. And in doing so, he inspired countless others to follow in his footsteps, ensuring that the skies truly belong to everyone.